You know that moment when a piece of technology stops working and, before anyone else even reaches for their phone to Google it, you've already tried turning it off, unplugging it, maybe even opening a settings menu most people didn't know existed. Not because you're obsessed with fixing things, it just feels natural to figure it out. There's a certain kind of person who grew up in a strange overlap of worlds. Someone who remembers life before constant internet, but also adapted quickly when everything suddenly moved online. Someone who can sit comfortably in both spaces but never fully belongs to either. People often read this wrong. They might assume you're cynical or overly independent. Maybe a little skeptical of trends, sometimes even hard to categorize. Not quite the carefree digital native people expect, but also not fully shaped by the slower analog world that came before. But that tension usually isn't a personality flaw, it's a pattern. And it shows up in people born roughly between the late 1970s and the mid-1980s, a small in-between generation often called Xennials. Most generational labels get simplified until they lose meaning. But this particular group sits in a genuinely unusual psychological position. Old enough to remember a mostly offline childhood, yet young enough that adulthood unfolded alongside the internet. Which means your brain developed across two completely different environments. Developmental psychologists have studied how the brain builds expectations about the world during adolescence and early adulthood. Those years quietly shape how people deal with uncertainty, information, and social trust. For many Xennials, childhood had friction built into it. If you wanted to know something, you had to look it up in a physical place. Ask someone. Wait for information. Trial and error was normal because answers weren't instantly available. Then suddenly the environment changed. Search engines appeared, social media emerged, entire industries digitized within a decade. From a neuroscience perspective, adapting to rapidly changing systems strengthens a particular set of cognitive skills. Flexibility, pattern recognition, tolerance for ambiguity. The brain becomes used to updating its internal model of the world. But it also leaves a subtle psychological imprint. You learned that systems change quickly, so relying completely on any one system never felt entirely safe. That's why many people in this age group instinctively double-check things, learn how tools work under the surface, or keep backup plans in their head without realizing it. It's not anxiety, it's adaptation. Researchers studying technological transitions have found that people who experience major environmental change during adolescence often develop what psychologists call adaptive skepticism. Not distrust exactly, but a quiet awareness that today's normal might disappear tomorrow. If you grew up installing software from CDs, then downloading it, then streaming it, you experience that shift repeatedly. Your nervous system learned something simple. Stability is temporary. And interestingly, that can create both resilience and distance at the same time. Many Xennials are comfortable troubleshooting problems that overwhelm younger or older groups, but they also tend to keep a slight emotional distance from platforms, trends, or online identities, because you remember when none of it existed. That memory quietly changes your relationship with technology. There's also a social layer people rarely talk about. Childhood in the late 80s and 90s often involved more unsupervised time, less digital tracking, more figuring things out with other kids instead of mediated communication. Then adulthood arrived alongside constant connectivity. Suddenly, everyone was reachable all the time. Psychologically, that shift can create a strange dual instinct, valuing independence while also being highly responsive when needed. Comfortable being alone but not disconnected from people. To outsiders, that mix can look contradictory. Independent but cooperative. Skeptical but adaptable. Private yet capable of navigating online spaces. But internally, it usually feels consistent. Because your brain learned two operating systems at once, and switching between them became normal. If this observation is landing somewhere familiar, it might help to pause here for a moment. Videos like this exist because enough people quietly recognize themselves in these patterns. If that's happening for you, leaving a like or subscribing simply helps more of these conversations find the people who've been wondering about the same things. One of the more surprising psychological traits researchers notice in people who grew up during transitional eras is a particular relationship with competence. When environments change frequently, status signals become unreliable. The brand everyone trusted disappears. The software everyone used becomes obsolete. The rules shift. So the brain often shifts focus from authority to adaptability. Instead of asking, what's the correct system? It learns to ask, how fast can I understand this one? That mindset is subtle but powerful. It can make you comfortable entering unfamiliar spaces because you already expect the learning curve. At the same time, there's a quieter cost that rarely gets mentioned. Living between worlds sometimes means feeling slightly out of sync with both. Older generations may see you as too digital. Younger generations may assume you're less fluent than you actually are. So you become used to translating, explaining older systems to younger people, explaining new systems to older people. Psychologists sometimes call this a bridge identity. People in these roles often develop strong observational skills because they're constantly reading two sets of expectations at once. But being a bridge can also be tiring, not dramatically, just subtly, like always standing with one foot on each side of something that keeps moving. The interesting part is that many people never consciously realize this is happening. They simply think, this is just how I am. But human behavior almost always has a context. When a generation grows up during a technological and cultural acceleration, the nervous system adapts to unpredictability, information flow, and social change in ways that later feel like personality. Practical, observant, self-reliant. Able to learn systems quickly. Comfortable stepping back when things become noisy. None of these traits appeared randomly, they were practiced quietly. Over years when the world kept updating itself, and none of this makes one generation better than another. Every environment shapes people differently. Some grow up fluent in constant connectivity. Others grow up skilled at navigating slower, more stable systems. Both have advantages. Both have blind spots. The Xennial experience just happens to sit at the intersection. Which is why so many people in that group describe a familiar sensation, understanding where things came from, while also seeing where they're going. Not perfectly, but instinctively. If any part of this reflection felt oddly specific, there's a reason for that. Patterns like these show up in more areas than technology or culture. They influence how people handle relationships, risk, privacy, even success and failure. And once you start noticing them, you begin to see the quiet logic behind behaviors that once seemed random. There are a few more of those patterns worth exploring.